In the golden age of Baghdad, a city of shimmering domes and bustling spice markets, there lived a restless young man named Sinbad, who spent his days staring at the horizon and dreaming of the vast, uncharted mysteries that lay beyond the sea. Sinbad had inherited a massive fortune from his father, a merchant of great renown, but in his youthful arrogance, he squandered every gold coin on extravagant feasts and fleeting pleasures until he found himself sitting alone in a cold and empty house, realizing that he had hit the very bottom of despair. Sinbad gathered his remaining courage and his last few pieces of silver to purchase a humble merchant ship, vowing to rebuild his family name through the dangerous and unpredictable trade of the ocean. He recruited a crew of weathered sailors who had survived 1,000 storms, and together they set sail from the port of Basra, leaving behind the safety of the land to face the monstrous waves and the whispered legends of the unknown deep. On his first voyage, the crew discovered a breathtaking island that seemed to have appeared out of the mist overnight, covered in lush fruit trees and sparkling streams that promised a paradise of rest after many weeks of salt and hard labor. However, as soon as they built a fire to roast their meat, the very earth beneath their feet began to heave and moan with a deep, subterranean thunder, throwing the terrified sailors into the churning foam of the sea. As the island began to sink, they realized too late that the island was actually the mossy, barnacle-encrusted back of a leviathan whale that had been slumbering on the surface for centuries, only to be awakened by the sudden heat of their cooking fire on its sensitive skin. Sinbad was swept away by a powerful current, clinging desperately to a floating wooden crate for 3 days and nights until he was miraculously washed ashore on a kingdom where the king's horses were groomed with brushes of pure, hammered gold. He earned the king's favor by saving the royal stallions from a sea monster, and in return, he was given a ship filled with exotic spices and rare gems, allowing him to return to Baghdad far wealthier than he had been when he first departed. Yet, the comfort of a soft bed and a warm home could not quiet the thunder of the waves in his heart, and soon Sinbad found himself back at the docks, preparing for a second voyage that would test the very limits of his sanity and survival. During this second journey, Sinbad was accidentally abandoned on a silent, sun-bleached island while he was napping in a hidden grove, and he watched in horror as his ship's sails disappeared into the horizon, leaving him a prisoner of the sand. While exploring the interior, he stumbled upon a smooth, white dome of such gargantuan proportions that it blocked out the sun, and he soon realized with a shudder of fear that he was standing next to the unhatched egg of a rock bird. When the mother bird, a creature so large that its wingspan created an eclipse, descended to the nest, Sinbad used his long silk turban to lash himself to its massive, scaly leg, hoping the bird would carry him to a place where humans lived. The rock soared into the clouds and dropped him into a terrifying, shadow-filled canyon where the floor was not made of dirt, but of millions of raw, jagged diamonds that cut through the soles of his boots with every step he took in the dark. This valley of diamonds was also the hunting ground for serpents of impossible size, creatures that could swallow an elephant whole and whose eyes glowed with a predatory hunger that forced Sinbad to hide in the narrowest cracks of the rock. He escaped by tying himself to a carcass of raw meat that had been thrown down by diamond hunters. An eagle snatched the meat and carried Sinbad up to its mountain nest, where he was finally rescued by the astonished and wealthy merchant travelers. Sinbad returned home with a sack of diamonds the size of pomegranates, but his spirit remained restless, and his third voyage saw him shipwrecked on the island of the Zub, a place inhabited by tiny, fierce ape-men who stole his ship and crew. They were then captured by a terrifying, one-eyed giant who lived in a palace of bones and who began to eat the sailors one by one, roasting them over a massive fire while the others watched in a state of paralyzed, weeping terror. Sinbad orchestrated a desperate and bloody escape, leading the remaining men to heat giant iron spits in the fire until they were red hot. which they then used to blind the sleeping giant before fleeing on a makeshift raft they had built in secret, though most of his friends were lost to the giant's boulders. Sinbad survived to realize that the sea was a cruel mistress that demanded a high price for every secret she revealed. Yet he could not help but return to her embrace again and again. His fourth voyage was a journey into the dark heart of human custom, as he was shipwrecked and captured by a tribe of islanders who initially treated him like royalty, feeding him rich foods that he later realized were meant to fatten him for a feast. He escaped their clutches and found his way to a more civilized city, where he introduced the king to the concept of a leather saddle, an invention that made him so famous and beloved that the king insisted Sinbad marry a noble and wealthy lady. Happiness seemed within his grasp until his wife suddenly fell ill and died, and Sinbad learned to his horror that the local law required the living spouse to be buried alive in a deep cavern alongside their deceased partner to ensure eternal companionship. Lowered into the pitch-black tomb with only a few loaves of bread and a jug of water, Sinbad spent weeks in the company of the dead, eventually following a small animal through a narrow crevice in the rock that led him back to the light of the sea. Each escape from the jaws of death refined Sinbad's soul, stripping away his youthful vanity and replacing it with a profound, humble wisdom and a fierce determination to survive no matter how many times the world tried to bury him alive in the dark. On his fifth voyage, his ship was destroyed by the vengeful rock birds, who dropped massive boulders from the sky in retaliation for the crew breaking one of their eggs, leaving Sinbad to wash up on an island where he met the old man of the sea. This deceptive spirit climbed onto Sinbad's shoulders and refused to let go, wrapping his legs around Sinbad's neck for many weary months until Sinbad managed to intoxicate the creature with fermented grape juice and finally cast off his heavy burden. The sixth journey saw him trapped in a mountain-walled coast where every ship that entered was destined to be crushed. But Sinbad discovered a river that flowed into a dark cave, and he built a raft to follow the water into the unknown depths. The river carried him into the heart of the magnificent kingdom of Serendib, where the emeralds were as large as his head, and the king was so moved by Sinbad's tales of the Caliph of Baghdad that he sent him home with gifts of unimaginable value. By his seventh and final voyage, Sinbad was a man of great age and even greater scars. Yet he accepted one last mission from the Caliph to deliver a message to a distant king, only to be captured by pirates and sold into the cruel bonds of slavery, forced by his master to hunt elephants for their ivory. Sinbad eventually earned the respect of the herd. The lead elephant carried him to a hidden valley filled with the bones of thousands of elephants, showing him a peaceful way to collect ivory without killing. Grateful for this revelation, his master granted Sinbad his freedom and a share of the ivory, allowing the old sailor to finally return to Baghdad with his head held high and his heart finally at peace with the many ghosts of his long and turbulent past. After 7 lifetimes of adventure packed into a single man's biography, Sinbad finally hung up his sea boots and retired to a life of quiet reflection. Surrounded by the gardens and the family he had fought so hard and so long to earn, he dedicated the remainder of his days to the service of the poor, building hospitals for the sick and schools for the children so that they might learn the value of the world without having to suffer the same terrors that he had endured. Every night, his grand hall was filled with the aroma of roasting meats and the laughter of friends as Sinbad recounted his legendary voyages, his voice rich with the cadence of the waves and the wisdom of a man who had seen the edge of the world. His tales of the rock bird, the Diamond Valley, and the sea monsters became the foundation of Baghdad's storytelling culture, teaching everyone that even the smallest man can overcome the greatest giant if he keeps his wits sharp and his spirit brave. He was no longer the foolish boy who had wasted his father's gold, but a man who had discovered that the only true wealth in this life is the collection of stories and the strength of character built through the fires of great and terrible adversity. Sinbad realized that every shipwreck was a beginning, Every cave was a doorway, and every monster was a teacher. And he looked back on his scars not as marks of pain, but as medals of honor won in the service of a life lived to its absolute fullest, the memory of his many ships, from the smallest raft to the grandest galleon, served as a constant reminder that the human spirit is a vessel built to withstand the greatest of storms. As long as it has a destination of hope to guide it home, the legend of Sinbad the sailor continues to sail through the ocean of time, a timeless testament to the power of curiosity, the necessity of resilience, and the eternal, unquenchable thirst for the wonders that lie just beyond the next blue horizon.